Spanish.
So that is the difference between...
A la bienvenida a todos. Es un gusto poder sentarnos aquí a compartir con realmente dos personalidades en áreas de la psicología y de la música. Me toca una presentación muy cortita, pero debo decir que tenemos aquí a Gary, tenemos una especie de Bach de la investigación, ¿sí? Y lo digo porque la obra de Bach es inconmensurable y cuando miramos y hacemos búsqueda bibliográfica siempre nos aparece Gary con cosas que nos sorprenden, desde el Handbook of Music Education hace 10 años y hace nada el Handbook of Musical Performance, que es una contribución espectacular, que todos estábamos esperando un concentrado de todo el conocimiento más actualizado sobre lo que sabemos sobre interpretación musical, y así innumerables trabajos. Nunca hemos trabajado juntos, pero hemos coincidido en Champaign Urbana, en la época que estaba, 2005-2009, que yo estuve allí en 2006. Le he visto como presidente de la Sociedad Internacional de Educación Musical, con una gestión muy interesante, saneando la sociedad y abriéndola a nuevos... en fin, que vengo siguiendo su carrera, aunque no hemos trabajado. I'm saying that I've followed your career. We've been in coinciding in many places, but we've never worked together. But I'm saying that you're kind of, if I may say, kind of Bach in your the extension of the handbooks you've been editing, all the knowledge you've been concentrating and offering to our audiences in a compact way, in a condensed way. Y de Beatriz, bueno, también muy agradecido a Beatriz, que desde California va a compartir con nosotros. Yo creo que Amalia, que ha estado trabajando con ella 3 meses, va a estar más en condiciones de presentar cosas más concretas. Y nada, I'm really thankful for your participation in this seminar. Y bienvenidos a todos a esta oportunidad de compartir conocimiento y aprender cosas nuevas.
Musician, a great athlete, and like an outstanding or an expert in the field, they can rise to this other level. So it's about your feelings of self-efficacy, that you feel you can do something. Okay, so I study that with younger children and learners. And what we found is, we did studies of how much practice they've done for an examination or recital or a concert, and how they're feeling immediately before they walk on stage. Like, I'm a trumpet player. Do I feel that I can hit the top E flat in the second line of the heightened trumpet concerto immediately before I walk on stage? Do I think I can do it? Not that I will do it, but do I feel that I can do it? That's self-efficacy. And we know that self-efficacy is a stronger predictor of academic success, or even in music, etc., than is performance and practice. And that's exactly what I found in 2 major studies that I did. One with children who were preparing for associated board examinations, and Australian music examinations as well, where they have an external examiner, have to come in to a new venue and perform for that examiner. And so self-efficacy was a much better predictor than was performance. So let's turn direction just a moment. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But, what we often find is parents often give up on their child's music education before the child gives up. So we did a study with young learners. We studied these children for 15 years. Very intense research. I was working with every child for the first 5 years, multiple times a year. We were phoning the parents every few weeks to figure out how much practice the child was doing, talking to their teachers, their school teachers. Really intense research. But what we found is, in the first year, that the mothers reminded the children to do their homework, their school homework, about 80% of the time. And then in the first couple of months, about 80% of the mothers reminded their child to do music practice. By the end of the first year, 80% of the mothers were reminding the child to do the homework, but less than 50%, it was close to 40%, were reminding them to do their musical practice. Why? Because mothers and parents make very, very quick assessments about whether they feel their child has it or doesn't have it. And I think, in some ways that parents give up on their children before the child starts to feel that themselves. So quite often the feeling's not coming from them, but it's coming from external sources, the negative, niggling doubts about whether you want to do this or not. And so teacher body language can send signals to students about their progress and their ability. One of my PhD students looked at 6 of the best teachers, violin, piano, flute, in Australia. And these teachers have very, very good students in conservatoriums, right? Very good students. They found that the positive and negative speech and comments to students was no difference between the top and the bottom students. But the bottom students received much more negative feedback body language, right? So a lot of this stuff is not explicit. It's coming over in other ways, and it's constant. And that's what we need to be aware of in terms of music education and, how we deal with the students who are struggling. How can we, treat them fairly? And I guess that's one of the reasons why I really like self-determination theory by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. It's been around since the 1980s. And look, there's tens of thousands of studies in this area. It's one of the most robust theories that we have in any area. But it's really about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is doing an activity for its inherent satisfaction rather than for some separable consequence. You're doing it because you love it. You want to do it rather than you're going to get pocket money or whatever. Extrinsic motivation is undertaking an activity in order to attain some separable outcome. There's something external that is influencing the act. And so it's just those basic concepts. And we know that humans inherently are oriented towards growth and well-being. I mean, we thrive when we feel we're in control and we can make choices. And our motivation decreases when others make choices for us and we feel we don't have control. Now, think about a learning situation. In Australia, children receive maybe a half an hour instrumental lesson, piano or violin lesson, or whatever it is each week, sometimes in groups. But, might be an hour a week. And then they have 6 days before they see their teacher again on the instrument. So we cram in things and we tell them what to do, right? But in essence, at its essence, that's external reinforcement, right? So how can we turn that around so that a child feels the passion and love that I felt from my very first lesson? And I can't explain why. Because I didn't have very good teachers. And so here's the theory, here's the complete theory of self-determination theory. And you can see that in the middle there, you go from amotivation, complete disinterest and hostility toward an area, right through to intrinsic motivation and doing it because you want to do it, you love it, etc., etc. And most children are somewhere in the middle, and we're trying to get them to move a little bit more to the right. But they'll fluctuate. Some years they'll be more towards the right, other years they'll be more towards the left. What we've got to try and do in our teaching is move them more to the right. But in that theory, the most important part are the psychological needs. Now, all humans thrive on or need 3 psychological needs to be satisfied. The first one is relatedness. In any situation, you need to feel connected with others who are also doing the activity. So if you're learning, it might be your friends are learning music or your teacher. You feel connected to your teacher, right? So you feel you can have a conversation with your teacher. You can talk to your teacher and you respect, what he or she might say to you. The next one is the need to feel competence. We will not do anything in our lives unless we feel we can be successful to a certain extent. The most important is the need for autonomy, choice. And that's the one that I'm spending more of my time researching. The need to feel that we're in control. The need to feel that I'm learning this because I want to learn it rather than my teacher wants me to learn it. The need to feel that I'm in control of the music when I'm practicing rather than the music is controlling me. I just feel helpless because I can't do it, and no matter what I do, I'm not getting any better. Okay, so those psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, they're the food and the basis of intrinsic motivation. Personal choice, the right type of feedback you get from others, which builds up your sense of competence and whether you feel you can do it, and relatedness, feeling included, and empathy and care and compassion within the learning situation. So there's some wonderful research, not seen in a complete slide there, but it's from Bob Vallerand and his colleagues in Canada. They do wonderful research. It's a sub-component of self-determination theory. And this is a study, and it's just an abbreviation of the study they did with musicians in Canada. And they were looking at people who were passionate about an activity. And through their scales, they can identify two different types of passionate individuals, people who are doing activity because they actually love it. The first one is obsessive passion. The people like orchestral musicians or a lot of musicians who feel, I'm not going to practice unless I've got a gig or, et cetera, I've got to play this piece. So they're being influenced by outside sources. That might be a child learning, and the father gives them the child pocket money, a little bit of money or something in order to practice, right? So they're being coerced, shaped by extrinsic factors in some way. That's psychological control. It might be very mild, it might be very extreme. You get people like Lang Lang and Michael Jackson who, extreme forms of psychological control from their parents, whereas it might be very, very gentle. But it is a form of psychological control. And that will build obsessive passion. So you can see psychological control is positively related to obsessive passion. Obsessive passion is positively related to stress. And they're the ones who typically, when they have, problems, hit a brick wall or, have a failure, are very unlikely or less likely to succeed and continue and persist. Whereas the harmonious passion is where they feel that they're in control of their learning. Autonomy support is positively related to harmonious passion, and harmonious passion is positively related to persistence. They're the ones who are more likely to succeed because they've got this desire and passion, which is harmonious and positive. So look, that's very, very quickly, just a sketch of the theory, but it's a really good theory. And I love thinking about and reading their research because I think it's one of the most exciting things happening in education psychology right now. And so we've used this theory. Here's a study with Elsa Coopers in the Netherlands, who came to Australia to work with me while she was doing a PhD, and we did some publications together. And she was looking at very young children, 7 and 8 years of age, learning stringed instruments, violin and cello, I think it was. And she was looking within a lesson, the amount of engagement of the child, how concentrated is the child on the lesson, and how much autonomy do they have, how much choice do they have in the lesson by the comments of the teacher, etc. And you can see you've got these 4 quadrants, but the 2 that we see in a lot of lessons, the first one is mimicry, and you see that in most instrumental lessons. The teacher tells the child what to do, the child does it. So they're engaged, but there's very little choice for the child. And so autonomous engagement is the sweet spot. So essentially in her research, she was interested in comparing children's progress who are getting a lot more mimicry from the teacher as compared to autonomous engagement. And she came up with, these really elaborate, mapping of lessons. Everything a child said, everything a teacher said, everything a child did, everything a teacher did was mapped onto these things. It took hundreds of hours to map. I'm really serious. And you can see, the level of engagement is different and the level of autonomy. They're just sort of a profile. But what were the results? Well, the results were very, very simple and quite powerful. She found that high autonomy support, when there's a dialogue going on between the teacher and the child, there's a conversation going on. The pace of the lesson isn't as fast, but the child has more choice and is occasionally asked, what do you think? Could you do it? What would you like to do? Just occasionally, then that triggers engagement. They were much more engaged in the lesson. Low autonomy support triggers resistance. So we have these 2 profiles of teachers who are authoritarian, tell the kid what to do, as compared to authoritative, which is, you work with the child and, manipulate a little bit. You're still very, very demanding, but you're receptive to the child. Authoritarian styles of teaching triggers mimicry and less meaningful interactions between the teacher and the student. And the more authoritative style of teaching triggers engagement, curiosity, persistence, and more positive values about learning music. So very simple results, but very powerful results that came through very, very clearly in her research with young children learning musical instruments. Now, again, the slide is sort of cut off a bit here. But if you look at all the educational psychology and all the hundreds of studies that have been done on this, and one of the best researchers is John Marshall Reeve, who does superb, wonderful research in this area and has just published a new book on autonomy support and autonomy supportive environments and how to do that as a teacher. You find that autonomy support environments create less frustration, less feelings of helplessness in the child, less negative feelings in the child. They're less self-criticism or it's less self-critical of themselves. They have less negative thoughts. They get more positive feedback from the teacher. They tend to plan and use strategies more, and in general, they love their teaching more. So autonomy supportive environments can be very, very powerful in shaping a child's willingness to learn and willingness to really work hard. And so in one of the chapters in the handbook, the 7th chapter in the first section, which I wrote with John Hattie, who's an expert in this area, we talk about these 10 mind frames that epitomise highly impactful teaching. And, I won't go through all of these, but the first mindsets of a teacher, and this is how our teacher education course is based on this in the University of Melbourne. But the first one is about our impact, measuring our impact on the learner. And the question for the teacher is, am I effective? Am I assessing my impact on the child? The next one is about challenge and change. Am I creating change and transformation in the child? And that's, do I inspire the child or the learner? And then the last one is about the learning focus. How are you doing it? And that's about developing a toolkit of teaching strategies, right? So they're the 10 mind frames that shape our teacher education course at the University of Melbourne. So time on task doesn't necessarily mean effective learning. There's a lot of literature saying that you have to do 10,000 hours of practice to be an expert and there's no evidence of fast tracking. Maybe, but that's not what it's all about. You can spend a lot of time on a task and still not learn much. You see that with recreational golfers or people who do things for recreation. I play chess as, recreational chess. I never get better. In fact, I'm getting worse because I do, play chess on chess.com. So just doing it doesn't mean I'm going to get better. It has to be purposeful and it has to be, self-motivated. So practice should be viewed as deliberate and purposeful use of time. So when children are doing their practice, when they're doing their homework, unless it's purposeful, then it's not going to achieve much. And so the focus should really be on challenges to be met rather than time spent on the task. Now, I remember when I worked my longitudinal study, I asked the teachers, what do you say to the kids? In those first couple of lessons, what do you say to the kids about, practice? And typically the answer was, well, I tell the parents and I tell the students that if they practice 5 days a week at about 20 minutes a day, they'll be fine. So their focus is on how much time you do practice, right? Then we have videos of the children and they put the clock on. They'll be watching for 20 minutes, right? They neither have to do 20 minutes, but they've got to oil the valves and, and they're putting a new reed. I've got to go to the bathroom, get a glass of water. And so, that 20 minutes, they may have spent 20 minutes there, but there's only 2 or 3 minutes of effective learning. So, really, John Hattie and visible learning approach is really about the challenge. How can we challenge students to do it? And, Carol Dweck, for example. We've seen all this. You guys know a lot of this stuff, I'm sure. You know, the sense of fixed mindset and growth mindset. This is transformed in, you know, it's a little old-fashioned in some ways. It's been, you know, developed into more sophisticated theories. But it's really about fixed mindset as the individual sees their ability as fixed and unchangeable. And that's one of the serious problems we have in music. Children very, very quickly learn that this is hard, and I can do this and I can't do that. Doesn't matter whether I practice. I'm never going to be any good at that. I'm okay on that, right? I'll never forget my son, my second son, who I love, adore, is a fantastic kid, incredibly creative. You know, he's in charge of a business in New York now. He earns 3 or 4 times the salary I earn. But I'll never forget when I was teaching him trumpet, he looked up at me when he was about 9 years of age and he said, "Dad, I could never be as good as you." That's a fixed mindset, right? And so the growth mindset is where the individual sees their ability and potential as fluid and within their control. And so this is the difference between, actually, I'm going to take that back. This is the difference between success and, you know, stalling and just sort of burning out. And I often say to my students, what's the most wonderful word in the English language for a teacher? The best word you could ever use as a teacher in English. It's the word yet. So if a child says to you, "I can't do this," you say, "Yet." "I'm no good at this." "Yet." "I don't like you." "Yet." Okay, so, you know, it's "I can't do it" versus "I can't do it yet." You know, it flips from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Just one word. So, you know, as a teacher, use the word "yet." That really gets the kids. And, you know, we've seen all the, you know, the flow and all inspirational teaching is about challenge focus. You know, you've seen all the Jigsaw Me High and all the other things. I mean, it's so common. But, you know, John Hattie in Visible Learning had said that in traditional music education, knowledge is seen as the flow of information from teacher to student. But the problem there is it's monologue. You know, the teacher just tells them, you know, that do it this way. "Oh, follow me. You know, no, that wasn't right." Sort of, that's monologue, short utterances. There's not a conversation going on. But in contemporary music education, feedback should be a two-way process where students are encouraged to give feedback to their teacher, more dialogue. And it's much, much more powerful for students. That QR code has, you know, all my Google Scholar and all my list of, you know, references and things if you want to go into that. I've only touched on a couple of the things that I'm really, really interested in. And, you know, this is not something you can learn overnight, but more and more and more, if I want my legacy to be anything, I want my students that I teach to understand that there are better techniques. The teaching is like learning your instrument. You have to practice it. It's not easy, and sometimes, but, you know, if you can learn a couple of simple techniques, you can really make a huge difference to your effectiveness as a teacher. Most of all, we want to get students who really love what they're doing and, you know, turn just a few more of them on to music, and so that they'll play and love music like I do for the rest of their lives. So that's what it's all about. So I think at that point I might stop and ask if there's any questions or break off. What would you like to do now? Yeah.